Welcome. My name is Chad Ferguson. I am, as you can read in the bio, I work in the Office of the Senior Deputy Chancellor at the New York City Department of Education. I spent most of the last 20 years of my career working in schools or school districts, and most of that work focused on students who are sort of on the margins, so kids that don't come to school all ready to learn with everything taken care of and doing a good job, both in a school building level and in a district support kind of way. So I'm pretty excited to facilitate this conversation. We have a panel of people who are also focused on exactly those things. And I'm pretty much a jump right into it kind of guy, so I want to get us all in the same mindset before we have this conversation so that we're all talking about the same thing. The title of the session is Youth Engagement, which I think can get thrown around a lot and can mean a lot of different things. So I thought it would be useful just to put up a definition that we can use for this conversation to focus what we're talking about. So a simple way for me to talk about youth engagement is to break it up into 4 categories. And basically it's all of the things that a child needs as he or she grows up in order to do well with what an adult needs to be able to do. So physical needs such as health and making good health decisions. Are they forming good, healthy habits? And obviously this changes a lot from when you're 8 years old to when you're 18 years old. You're making different kinds of decisions, but they all need to be good. Intellectual, which is sort of the direct work of schools. Are they learning, are they able to execute on the standards, for instance? Can they demonstrate the skills that we need them to demonstrate from school? Psychological and emotional. Can they regulate themselves? Can they get along with other people? Can they make decisions for themselves and hold responsibilities? Do they feel good about themselves both individually as a person and also as part of a group, and usually part of different groups? And then finally, social, which is how connected are they to other people? How do they relate to the world? And especially, I think, for a lot of the students where Teach for America works, are they able to relate to different kinds of worlds? Are they able to shift between maybe the neighborhood where they're growing up and what they need to be able to do in school and where they want to go next? Because sometimes those are very different kinds of contexts. So that's sort of the overall theoretical part of this. I'm really hoping that we don't stay at the theoretical level in this conversation. And to help that along, I thought it would be helpful to really get down to what we're talking about, which is kids. So this is a picture of, it's a long time ago now, when I was teaching at an alternative high school in the Bronx, and this was my family group, which is kind of like an advisory. We met every morning. And I wanted to put this picture up for a couple reasons. One, if I went through and talked about each of these students, you would hear me talk about things like experience spending time in prison, or experience being homeless, or experience raising a child and going to high school at the same time. Sort of the entire gamut of what poverty looks like in an under-resourced school is in that photograph. But the more important thing that I want to point out about this is look at those smiles. And look how they're leaning together like that. That's first thing in the morning at a high school of 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. And they look like they like each other, and they look supportive. And they look relatively happy to be there. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about youth engagement. How do we meet needs of kids so that they can look like that at school? Because looking like that at school turns into doing well at school and doing well at what they want to do next. So to take this one next step further, those are the kids that I keep in my mind as I have these kinds of conversations. And I want everyone here just to take a minute and think to yourself, what kid or children or students or relatives do you want to keep in your head when we talk about how do we support students as best as possible? If it's a smaller group, I usually have people say their names out loud, but I won't do that now. But please keep them in mind, and I think we'll be able to keep this into a really rounded conversation. So now, jumping to the panel, I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about where they're coming from and what they're focused on right now. Let's start at the end with Trisha.
Sure. Hi, I'm Trisha Santiago. I was a 2003 Houston Corps member. I am currently in Newark, New Jersey as the Deputy Chief of Staff. In this role, I support a bunch of different initiatives. Right now, I am working on building out our Office of Early Childhood. As we know, pre-K3 and pre-K4 is the foundation at which strong social emotional skills are developed. So on the panel today, in addition to speaking from my experience at Newark Public Schools, I'll also be talking from the lens of having launched a education program for 18 to 25-year-olds who had emancipated out of the foster care and juvenile system, and the work that our program did around supporting young people who had aged out.
Hello, my name is Babette Hemphill, and I'm a 1992 Corps member from the RGV, and I'm currently the Executive Director of Student Services and School Choice in Garland ISD, which is a suburb of Dallas in Texas. And the work that we do in student services is primarily compliance work, attendance, truancy, but we became involved in the response to intervention effort for our school district, especially dealing with behavior. And that's kind of how I come at this work. And I also come at it very personally because I live in my community, my kids go to school there, and personally, my oldest child did not complete at that particular school district because there were some issues. So that's why we sort of have moved our work outside of compliance and are really looking at what it is that we need to be doing for our students to keep them engaged. So it's something that I'm doing professionally, but I also have a very personal reason for why I'm doing it.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Lambrecht. I was a 2009 Corps member in Greater New Orleans, and I am still in New Orleans at Sci Academy, where I'm the Director of Intervention. My background is as a special education teacher. I taught primarily students with significant disabilities, including mild, moderate intellectual disability. I currently, as the Director of Intervention, I'm overseeing RTI programming and special education services, both on the academic side as well as the behavioral side, and also overseeing mental health services for our students.
My name is George Dahl, and I am a Chicago 09 Corps member, and I'm the founder of Education Insight. We believe that clear vision is a fundamental human rights issue, and our mission is to eliminate poor vision among low-income students in the U.S. and around the world.
Hi everyone, my name is Claire Blumenson. I'm a 2006 New York alum. I taught at Excellence Boys Charter School, which is one of the Uncommon schools. And more recently, I just started the School Justice Project, which is a legal services nonprofit organization dedicated to representing youth in the juvenile or criminal justice system who are between the ages of 18 to 22. So we're, my co-founder and I are special education lawyers, and we basically make sure that once you get into the juvenile system, and you're at this sort of older age where you still have special education rights under federal law, that you're actually able to receive the education that you're entitled to. So we worked, I worked for 2 years in DC's secure facility, which is called New Beginnings, and now our nonprofit is outside of that. So a lot of what we do has to do with direct representation, so going to school meetings, contacting teachers, making sure that what the student is supposed to get, he actually receives, but then also on a systemic level, working with the government agencies to actually get policies changed and to get the system to provide a better education for this older cohort of students.
All right, so a couple of logistics things before we dive into the conversation. One is we're going to lose Trisha and Babette a little bit early. They're going to sneak out because they have to go to a different session. So you might keep in mind if questions come up that you would really love a direct answer from either of those two, we'll try to get to those early, and I'll try to pay attention to the time so we can do that. The second thing, you each have an index card or cards that you got when you walked in. Please feel free as the session or as the conversation goes along to write down questions, and we'll have people collecting the index cards throughout. And when we get to the question part, I'll start with those index cards. If we run out of those, or if you have burning questions, I'll also just jump in. You can just raise your hand and we'll just treat this like a really big class. So let's dive in and get right to the heart of what we're talking about. I'd like to ask the panel, how do you see your work playing out inside classrooms? In other words, why do students need what you do?
I'll start. The easiest answer is my students aren't really in the classrooms. When you turn 18, and especially if you've had sort of a history of juvenile justice involvement, well, let me step back. When you can be in the juvenile justice system after age 18, and I don't know if that's something that everyone knows. So a lot of juvenile justice systems can have custody over you, like up until age 21, for example. I'm in DC, and up until age 21, you can still be in a juvenile facility. The problem is, like, after you turn 18, you're not really considered a student. Often, even if you have special education rights and you can be in school, you're also not really considered, what you think of as a juvenile, right? Because you're over age 18. And so the problem is that, like, our perceptions of what a student is and what a child is, they really go into play with what resources are available. So there aren't a lot of schools that really are designed for these older students who might be years behind the rest of their peers. One of the big problems with the juvenile justice system is you can get sent, like in DC, you can get sent all over the country to facilities. So imagine how frustrated you would be if you had spent like 3 years in a residential facility in Utah, and you come home to DC, and you learn that instead of being a senior, you're a freshman because your credits didn't transfer. I mean, I would go absolutely insane if I had spent 3 years in school getting A's and B's and found out none of them counted. So the problem is if there aren't schools available or programs available that really cater to this older, overage, undercredited population of students, then a 19, 20-year-old would be sent to a 9th grade classroom with 14-year-olds as a freshman. I mean, that is really, it's frustrating, and it makes you disengage immediately. So one of the biggest issues with engagement and with available resources is that older students with special education needs really, they're not involved in the system that we currently have.
I can jump in there. To Claire's point, just really appreciating the need for that, giving an excellent education to that population of learners. And I feel very fortunate to be at Science Academy, where we've said, as a school in the city, we're going to put a stake in the ground to say that we're going to be a school that provides excellent education for all scholars. But that's hard. I was sharing with the panel before we started, we're one of the few schools in the city that has a therapeutic program or a therapeutic option. And for someone in New Orleans who has severe emotional disturbance or has needs on that level, there aren't a lot of options to get quality services. And so I think from a more systems level, there's, as a school is defining its priorities, as a school we can say, wow, we're really gonna push rigor this year with our teachers. We're gonna train our teachers to provide really rigorous instruction. But it's also important for the school to be, in the line of priorities, be thinking, and we're also gonna train our teachers to be really great mental health providers, right? To have the skills needed to engage scholars in that way in the classroom setting, so that teachers are providing academic needs as well as social emotional needs. And that is specific training that you can give to teachers to provide those needs to adults. And so, to the question, how does this play out in your work? I think as a director of intervention, right, it's part of my priority to set those priorities for my school and to give that training to my teachers. Our social worker at Sci Academy provides a nice analogy where she says, every kid comes into school with a bag of rocks, and those rocks are different sizes and those rocks are different shapes, but they represent different things that are happening in that student's life outside of these doors. A teacher's job is to partner with that student to help that student understand there's actually a bag that you can leave at the door, and it doesn't have to follow you into this classroom. You can enter this classroom with your social, emotional health needs met so that you can engage in the content here. And there are specific moves that you can teach teachers to do that. When Chad was saying, who's the student you'll keep in the forefront of your mind, for me it's one of my advisees named Audrey, who, when her needs are met, there is no stopping her. There is no stopping what she can accomplish, but when her needs aren't met, she will do anything in her power to get outside of class. And it's this fundamental connection that if she's in a classroom where she is confident that the teacher cares about her needs, she will stay. But if she questions that, she doesn't have that relationship, she's doing everything she can do to get out of there. And so just giving teachers the skills to make Audrey feel like their classroom is a place where their voice is heard. That's like really fundamental to the work that we do in training teachers. And I think also what's been big in our work this year is really digging into this idea of soft skills and character strengths education. Kip's done a lot with it, and we're really excited to learn from Kip and start to build that out in our school and our network. But viewing soft skills as actual skills that you can teach kids, that when faced with challenges in their community, challenges at school, whatever, there are problem-solving skills that they can go through. Classrooms should be places where they are being taught those skills. Teachers should be knowledgeable in how to put structures and routines into their classrooms and know how to tag moments with scholars to say, oh, hey, this is a learning opportunity for you to understand how to apply this soft skill in this context.
And from our work that we do in student services, we look at if things do not go well in the classroom and kids' needs are not being met, if we need to bring in outside services. And so our job is to keep the child in the classroom so that they can access the wonderful education that they are getting, and to figure out how we partner with either other departments within the school district or with outside agencies that may be able to come in and to support students. We do a lot of work with our county health services as well as private organizations that want to come in and support our students. And so we keep those relationships open and going so that we can support kids and hopefully keep them where they are.
There are three reasons why Education Insight is in the classroom. One is, in this country, 3.5 million kids cannot see the board because they don't have access to eye care and eye glasses. Last year we did a survey. We surveyed 25 Teach for America core members and alums around the country, and 96% of them say that they notice their kids struggle in the classroom because of poor vision, but they don't have access to eyeglasses. 90% of information students receive in the classroom is visual information. Three, research shows that after kids simply obtain a pair of eyeglasses, before and after they obtain about 25 to 50% more, they learn 25 to 50% more in the classroom. And they are less likely to drop out. And that's why we are in the classroom.
A lot of the work that I do right now with the Office of Early Childhood and that we've done supporting our high schools is related to what Kelsey was saying. So what's important for us is selecting, hiring, and training educators who, in addition to having the ability to connect with their students and facilitate that space of openness and safety, it's important for those individuals who are in the classroom for themselves as well to have that social emotional intelligence. It's important to what Kelsey said about making sure students know that they can leave their bag of rocks at the door, that our teachers and those of us who are providing the training are aware of the bags of rocks that we carry and that we can carry into the classroom and into our work, and we leave those at the door as well. I think that there's a personal responsibility and a sense of self-awareness there that we as educators need to have and model in what we are expecting of our students when we're working with them. So in terms of my work, it's really looking at selecting for folks who are passionate for the work, but also have that sense of self-awareness and willingness to go to those vulnerable places. And a phrase that we use is, to be able to cover your own buttons, to be able to recognize when your own button might be pushed, and to have strategies yourself for working through that, and to have colleagues that you can be transparent with.
Most of you have touched at least a little bit on what adults in schools need to be good at in order to provide this kind of support to students. I'm wondering if we can get a little bit more specific about what would be ideal from your perspective in terms of what the skills and attitudes are of people who work in schools. For instance, I think probably most people would agree that we don't expect a teacher to be able to give a medical diagnosis about a vision problem, right? But at some point along that continuum, we want a teacher to be aware that that could be an issue, right? So can you speak a little bit to where you see the right balance about where adults in schools need to be able to be experts at things, or almost expert, or just aware?
Sure, I'll jump in there. To Tricia's point, I think that one thing we talk about a lot with teachers too is like social intelligence, and how we spend a lot of time talking about how to have difficult conversations with adults on staff, and how to demonstrate this self-awareness of what's going on with me, what's going on with you. But then also making the explicit connection that our kids need that awareness from us as well. And we need that awareness of ourselves, of the things that we're bringing into the classroom. And one thing, I think sometimes it's easy for a teacher to get in this space of, this is my space, my expectations go here, but realizing, we're humans, right? We're all gonna have those moments where we cross the line and we say something in a way that we shouldn't have said it, whether it's with other adults or it's with kids. But it's so important for our teachers to take that as a learning opportunity, to step back and say, actually, Scholar, I just lost my patience, and here's why that happened.
Yeah.
This is what I was feeling in my world when this happened. And then giving the student the opportunity to do the same. And that's hugely important, right? There's modeling in that for them, but this is how we deal with hard things that happen, and also this is how we look inside ourselves to identify that so we can move forward. We do that with our teachers a lot, and think that skill is really important. Also, just kind of tempering teachers' expectations for growth. And if I said to any one of you right now, I'm glad you're here right now, but tomorrow I need you to come back in a uniform that's perfect. I need you to come back with all of your materials ready to go. I need you to be more participatory in this session, and I need you to be able to make some connections to 4 articles that I'm going to have you read tonight. And I gave you all those things. I said that these are the expectations for tomorrow. That would be really overwhelming for any one of us in here to come back and be expected to meet those expectations. And similarly, with many of our scholars, teaching teachers, hey, we need to pick small things that we're going to work on right now, small bite-sized goals, and that's what your focus is with this kid. And you see growth in light of that small goal, and you celebrate that with the scholar, instead of it being, oh my gosh, nothing's going right. Like, I tried this thing and it wasn't different tomorrow. Being like, hey, this is a process, and we all learn like that. And kind of tempering those expectations for how long it's going to take to see growth, combined with a 100% high expectation approach. That regardless of what this scholar is facing at home, regardless of the rocks he or she is bringing, learning is possible, and learning and growth is the standard. And that expectation will not be changed and will not be compromised, regardless of the circumstances that are going on.
And to add to what Kelsey's saying, it sounds like, to your question, Chad, about what are the need-to-haves in the classroom, high expectations, and I also think a strengths-based, value-added, perspective in the classroom is hugely important in creating an environment in which that is the focus, and it is really important.
So we've talked about bags of rocks a couple times. And so I have a couple of questions about bags of rocks, actually. One is, what are some of the most typical kinds of rocks that you see your students bring in, or the young people that you work with or talk about? And then the second, I'm wondering if the ideal is for students to drop their bag of rocks at the door before they come in. Is there wiggle room with that? Have you seen, or do you think it's possible to be able to use those rocks in order to help students learn better at all? And so how does that work out? Like, given that not every student is going to be able to just drop the whole bag before they walk in, either how do you get them to be better at that or more effective at that, or how do you help them use it or incorporate it into the work better?
That's a really good point. In my previous role, prior to Newark Public Schools, I worked at a wraparound voluntary mental health program, and our approach there was to meet students where they were, which meant they had bags and bags and bags and bags and bags of rocks. And as a matter of fact, oftentimes they might have felt like they were drowning in them. And so finding a way to structure the day, ensuring that all adults, myself included, were approaching students in a way that allowed them to chisel away at each rock, or just, I know we're speaking in a very figurative, way, but I want to give like a concrete example of just sitting with that student and with that rock and saying, it's okay. Like, that rock can actually help you break down some barriers. And so an example, for that is, I'm thinking of a student of mine who's, incredible at, for lack of a better word, kind of, hustling the system. And she was a very natural leader. And what we did is we looked at how she, would approach kind of like hustling. And what I mean by hustling is, when she'd go places, she'd be able to make really strong relationships. And from those strong relationships, be able to get resources for herself. Or she'd be able to, and I'm trying to think of some other examples. But the point is, we looked at how she was approaching, how she was surviving in her life, and how she could apply that to applying to the local community college. And so I think there are ways in which we can encourage our students to take the skills that they know and apply them in a way that they can use successfully in their kind of like academics and in the way that they interact with the world.
I have
maybe you can clarify some of the.
I have an example. If this goes more than a couple minutes, just someone take this mic away. One of my clients, and if I burst into tears, just get me off the stage. So he when he was 8, he lost his father. He then moved in with his grandparents. The next year, he lost his grandparents. He went to go live with his mother, and the child neglect system took him away from his mom. His mom worked so hard to get him back, and she did, but then he nursed her for 2 years through dialysis. Eventually, she passed away. When he was committed to the neglect system, he ended up starting to get into trouble. This was the same time that it was his first year of 9th grade in high school. He eventually failed 9th grade 7 times, and nothing, his special education level of service wasn't increased. And even though, his whole family was dying around him, the school's response was, the student is walking the halls instead of going to class, and so he's going to be suspended. And so when we talk about sort of asking that student why he's not in class, asking the student, why has his head down. It could just be that he, hasn't had any sleep and he's homeless. He might not be showing up to school because he doesn't have money for transportation. But if you come at it instead of from a skeptical standpoint, coming at it from a truly inquisitive standpoint, like, why didn't you come to class today? Instead of saying, every day you're missing class. I mean, there is some level of, it's not conflict. I mean, you can have high expectations of your students without making them impossible expectations that that specific student can't meet. And so eventually this student got involved in the juvenile justice system basically because he was getting suspended over and over and for truancy reasons. Once he was committed to the juvenile justice system, he was bounced around to different group homes. And eventually, right before he was aging out of the system at 21, he was placed in an out-of-state group home, simply because there weren't group homes that had beds available. As a result, he was in Virginia instead of in DC when he aged out, so he aged out homeless at 21. He's been homeless for the past year and a half, and he's attempted to get back in school, but because he was, his only living relative was in Maryland, he lost residency. So he was told he could go to a 9th grade classroom with 14-year-olds, but when you're 22, you're not gonna do that. This client actually did try. He came back to the car 4 times because he was so humiliated. Anytime a student walks by, he'd be like, oh my God, I don't wanna go in there, I feel too embarrassed. But that's not something we would ask our own children to do, right? I would never, ever ask someone I would never agree to my 22-year-old going into a classroom with 9th graders. I just wouldn't. So the fact that we're asking other people's children to do something like that is a problem. And so I don't think asking this student to leave his rocks at the door necessarily makes sense, because he's learned his whole life has been so affected by all of these individual circumstances. But what has been helpful is, actually sitting with him and talking with him, having him write it out. And eventually he realized that one of his biggest assets and biggest skills was advocacy and public speaking. He's since gotten involved with, his new mentor is someone who's at the White House Initiative for African American Excellence in Education, and he's really, this person has taken him under his wing. He's gone to speak at the different interagency councils, and he's a phenomenal public speaker. And he realized he wants to be a civil rights lawyer. And so, working, even though it's not, ignoring the rocks, it is dropping them at the door for the purpose of education, but saying, I've learned so much from these pieces that I'm gonna find my strengths in them and from them.
Let me try to pull something else out of that and answer a question on a card. It sounds like with this student, there were many, many opportunities for him to interact with adults in school buildings or in programs where teachers could have paid attention, or a guidance counselor or a mentor or something like that, but it sounds like it didn't happen.
Right.
So, and I think that's probably pervasive, right? I think a lot of people who work in schools or in districts come to it with an attitude like, that's really not an important part of my job, or my job is to teach reading or teach science. How do you, from your all perspective, how do you work with individuals who might come with that attitude to get them to open up and think and expand what their role with children can be?
That is actually one of the biggest frustrations of my job. I was listening to you all talk, and I was like, man, we have not got it figured out to that level, at the classroom level, where we've got people who think about the social and emotional learning of our students. We have a lot of folks who say, it's not my job to teach kids how to behave, and don't worry about covering up their buttons. And so one of the things that we offer as a department centrally is to let them know, of course, that is part of your job, but then we also put out there that there are all of these services that we can access. As I was listening to your story, Claire, I was thinking, okay, where was the homeless liaison with bus tickets for this particular student? We can offer that, we're given that. Where was somebody who was able to provide food? By accessing the lunch program. We have all of these things available, and we need to, as a central office, I know that I need to get the word out there to let everyone out on campuses know that that is what is expected. And then just very honestly, I think it is a matter of what Tricia was saying, and getting the right people in the right positions to do this work. And I'm in a very, very traditional school district where I am asked, if we're told certain things are not my job. And so I think at a certain level, you have to say, well, let me find somebody who believes that is their job.
Teaching was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I think on the one hand, we need to make it as easy as possible for teachers to get these services to their students. And that's what, we are working at Education Insight. Before we expand to different regions, we want to make sure that we create a system that is universally available, accessible for teachers, and every teacher, they can do a pre-screening for kids, and it's really easy to do. So we need to figure out that first before we roll it out.
So both of those responses were thinking at a system level, and it sounds like the two things are just get the right people doing the job, right? If the people who are there aren't aligned with the work that we think needs to be done, get the people there who would be. And the second is putting structures in place to make it easier for people to do what you want them to do. I want to get to one question before Tricia and Beverly, because it deals with systems. What are some other things that a system can do to build its own capacity to provide these kinds of supports?
One of the things that we do, and we're trying to do it better and better all the time, is to access all of the resources that are outside of the schools that want to come in. We're in a very traditional community, which also means that we have some very traditional structures in place. The faith-based community, we have different community civic organizations that want to come in and provide services for us. And we need to be able to reach our hand out and, of course, give what our particular guidelines are for coming into our campuses. But we do need to access those services that they provide for us and put them in touch with parents and our campuses. And the other is, of course, our parents. I mean, I'm a parent in the community, and I believe I am part of the solution. And so one of my jobs is student enrollment and school choice. And so as part of that, when a parent comes into our school district, we're able to hook them up with parent engagement activities. Our pre-K parents were able to bring them in for like a pre-K session where we talk to them about what's available in the schools and then what some of the expectations are, and then leave that particular activity with a bag full of activities they can do with their kids to carry them through the summer. And then they also know who they need to connect with throughout the school year in order to get services that they may need. But the most important thing is they can look across the whatever venue we're in and see, okay, there's another parent, there's another person for me to connect with. We also do translation and interpretation services in our department. So we have a lot of people who come back to us because they know, hey, they speak my language. And so they come back over and over even though we're not out at a particular campus. And we're able to connect them with the right people within our organization and also outside of our organization. And we look for really concrete ways that we can do that. We've started a volunteer translation interpretation service for our parents where we actually bring them back in and they're able to interface with other parents who happen to speak their language and provide not just interpretation for just very simple things like maybe meeting up with them and going to the school to address a particular issue if they feel comfortable enough asking for help doing that, but also in just kind of showing them the ropes. And so we try to create opportunities for our community to help itself and to heal itself.
Ditto. That was, yes. I mean, that's the pieces that you spoke to with regards to working with, local providers, working really closely with families are huge. I also think the leadership of the system has to see social emotional supports and integrated with the academic needs of students, and needs to, really brass tacks have that communicated in your strategic plan, in the district's vision for student achievement. And Newark does an incredible job at that. In all of our decision making, in all of our planning, we include how we are going to support the needs of students in a holistic and balanced way, so that our various offices, the Office of Family and Community Engagement, the Office of College and Career Readiness, the Office of Early Childhood, the Office of Special Education, our executive director of external affairs, are all operating from that same vision and coordinate amongst itself. I think that's an important system to acknowledge, the folks who are actually, working and making those decisions.
Thanks. So part of Betta's response was to talk about how parents can play a role in this and how to engage them. I want to broaden it a little bit and open it up to the rest of the panel. How do families in general fit into the work that you do?
Families are really involved
Yeah.
in the work that we do. I don't know exactly if I have like the best answer for this, but basically when we meet, for example, I drove one client, he took a 9 a.m. class, which, he's not a morning person. I'm not the best morning person myself. And, but he didn't have a way to get to school every day. And somehow it ended up, he always outsmarts me, so I ended up driving all the way to his house every day and going to pick him up and taking him to class. And, so every morning I spend time with his family, and, every single one of my clients' families have been very involved in their lives. I think as you get older, the school systems seem to reach out less and less to families. And so by the time you're 18 or 19, the family engagement piece with a lot of school systems just isn't there as much. So I think one of the key elements to all of it is just expanding our view of what a student is, expanding our view of what family engagement means, and expanding to a big extent, expanding what we see as like the job of a teacher and of a school system.
Yes.
Spending 20 minutes talking with someone's mom, talking with the student themselves can make a world of difference, and bring the family's trust, bring the students' trust. So, that's been my experience.
And to what Tricia was saying, you do have to make that part of your theory of action. Like, it has to be where you are operating from, that we are going to think about families first. And I'm ashamed to say, like, we deal a lot with dropout prevention, which is wonderful, but we also do truancy and attendance. And so we do have kids that become involved in the legal system because of truancy. And so as a department, what we had to say is, why are we here? What are we doing? And how are we affecting not just the students, but how are we affecting families? And putting paper on people and having them pay exorbitant fines is not helping kids. And so from our level where we are centrally, we're able to change that policy. We still have to comply with the law, but we're able to change our policy procedures and how we interact. And then we were also, I spoke a little earlier about how we dealt a lot with compliance and then realized there were problems. Well, in dealing with truancy, we realized that kids want to come to school. They want to come to school, but there are issues out there that keep them from accessing the education that we have. And I know there are kids who just, maybe they don't, but there are those who just really do want to come to school and they have some other issues. And in going home, doing home visits with our attendance administrators that I get to supervise, we found that there were some really significant mental health issues going on within our community. And so our school district was wonderful enough to let us in our department hire a cadre of social workers who are able to go into the home and work with parents who are willing. But again, you can only work with people who are willing to be worked with. They can make plans, they can even, build relationship with people and try to help them to complete the plan. But at the end of the day, it does rely on them. But as a district, I'm proud to say that we're able to offer those services now, whereas in the past we were not. And I think we were more part of the problem than part of the solution. And so we do have those people who are there ready to do that kind of work. And I think we, as a school district, we had to change how we were thinking about what we did. And it's not just about the academics. We do have to really look at what our kids are facing.
And Betta is really speaking to creating opportunities, right, for families to participate in, the lives of their child. And as someone who is the child of two immigrants, my parents wanted to absolutely be involved, but they didn't really know how, which to access the school system, how to be supportive. And so, you know, from my own family's experience, I know that it's hugely important for schools and districts to create opportunities, you know, to extend out a welcome to families, because, you know, in the end, of course, families fit into our work. They want to participate. They have given, you know, us their most precious resource, and so, you know, they're absolutely integrated, schools and families.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go to a question, which I'm going to paraphrase because it's long. But basically the question is, or the statement is, sometimes there are a lot of organizations or parts of a district that are around trying to provide support to students around the same topic, which sometimes becomes sort of an impediment on its own because people are either stepping over each other or tripping over each other. And so the question is, what's the best way to coordinate services, both from inside a school or a district, with all of the other parts of the community and people in the community who are also around that? How do you get it all aligned?
We have a director of intervention who meets with us regularly to make sure that we are coordinating our efforts in a manageable way. And I would like to say that that works out perfectly, but we really just have to keep the lines of communication open. And so just like we would do a staffing with our social workers that are in our department, we have to do sort of a staffing as a district as well, to make sure that I'm not duplicating the services of the folks who are in our health services department. And so that's kind of how we handle it, is basically our director of intervention gets us together from the various departments, special education, student services, health services, and even our curriculum and instruction, and that's the area that our intervention sits in. And we basically talk about what we're doing, the issues that we're facing, the student needs that are out there, and we talk about how we are addressing those. So we basically do a district-wide staffing after we've done sort of the same thing in our own departments.
This is a fantastic question, and I wish I knew the answer. I think one important piece can be sort of at the top level, having something like a memorandum of agreement that really delineates who is responsible for what, when. And because, oftentimes there will be the too many cooks in a kitchen issue, and so everyone thinks that the other agency or the other person responsible is doing it, and so then they don't, but then the other person doesn't act, or the other agency doesn't act. So I think you can sort of use that idea of having some kind of like a memorandum of agreement at a district level, and actually just have even as simple as a couple pages that says with every student you do this intake. This is the person assigned. Then within 2 weeks of X, make sure that this student has gotten connected to services. So something that's just concrete, because otherwise what you see is a lot of meetings and planning around that student, but you don't have a concrete agenda. And so there can be a lot of miscommunication, especially with so many different players involved. So I think having something that is a concrete written, something that has specific deadlines for every act that needs to take place, like enrolling them in mental health services, making sure that they have tutoring in place. If it's a pregnant teen, making sure that they have someone who's the coordinator for their medical. So something that's concrete would be my biggest advice.
For Education Insight, 46 states already set aside money for vision screenings and eyeglasses. So our job is to connect existing resources that is already there to classrooms. We're not trying to create anything new. We are just trying to make that connection to bridge the gap. And I think that exists in many other areas. The resources are already there, but we just need to bridge the gap.
So let's get a little more specific around the content. I think the many panelists are good people to talk about that. What are some suggestions you have of programs or curricula that a district or classroom teacher or a student support person can use to start getting at some of the things we're talking about.
I mean, I don't know if this is I don't know if this is asking for like specific names of programs, but which I won't have answered for. But I think having specific programs for like older students, disengaged students would be important, because right now there's no programming in place for them. And so I think if you look at where the gaps are, just making sure that you have schools. So for example, if students have special education needs, and I'm talking about like a lot of my clients either have like dyslexia, like learning disability, or else they're classified as having emotional disturbance, which there just aren't schools that will address these needs that are designed for older students. So if you were younger, you could find a school, or if you didn't have special education needs, but you were older, you could find a school. So just making sure that you have something for everyone in your school district and that you have choice is huge.
Yeah. If it's about specific programs, I'm not the best person to ask that, but come get an email from me afterwards and I can connect you to someone who can and would gladly do that. But I think as far as, the curriculum, the training, from my perspective, it's about the school or the system prioritizing it as a part of what we're doing here, right? So to be an effective teacher means I know my content. To be an effective teacher means I know these pillars about meeting social emotional needs in my classroom, and that I don't disconnect them, I don't separate them. And as a leader in my school, as someone with a voice in the decisions that are made, saying when we develop our teachers, when we're thinking about what our teachers need to be effective in the classroom, it's both of those things together. And we're no longer going to ever give a PD that's about meeting social emotional needs that has this flavor of, if you want to implement this, or if you feel like you're ready to implement this. We're done with that. Instead, it's going to be, do you want to be effective? Cool, here's what you need. And that it's married just like it would be with content expertise or how to plan for rigor and all of those instructional moves. And to be slightly more specific, I do think one thing from the research that is overwhelmingly beneficial is the restorative justice practices. And whether that's a school-wide program that you're implementing in some way, or even just giving teachers this framework that they're using in their classroom of something happens, there's been harm in the community. There are moments where the next day the teacher needs to operate as though nothing happened, but in the long term, it's going to be better for that kid if there's an opportunity to dive into that and repair the harm that was done, and to dig into that conversation, hear what the impact was of that moment, and also give the scholar the opportunity to say, here's what was going on in my world when this thing happened, now how do we move forward from here? And I think overwhelmingly the research around that is really positive, and if you want to do a specific thing at your school, implement that framework.
One other thing is, just quickly, I would challenge everyone to actually take time to look up resources in your community. I think if there were a broader knowledge of what's available, so how can you get like your record expunged? Or what do you do if your mom's getting evicted? So just in the school, having resources that aren't just district resources, but that are the entire community resources, that would be invaluable. And I think it would make students and families feel a little bit more connected.
So I'm going to jump to a different card, which is sort of a follow-up to this. What would you say to or advise for teachers who cannot legally or feasibly meet the needs of their students? So if we're asking them, right, if we're asking them to have good conversations about making good sex ed choices, sexual choices, for instance, and there's a law that says teachers can't talk about that with students, what do you do?
Well, with disabilities, I mean, you need to go, if you cannot meet the student's needs, and then you need to make sure that the student is able to access a school that can. And so I know it's hard as a teacher to know when to really push back on administration, but this is a should. And there are also a lot of resources, again, where if you feel like with special education that you can't meet their needs, give the parent or the adult student access to legal counsel. Give them, they're always free, there are always nonprofits where they can get representation if they need help with this matter. So don't be afraid to use it.
Yeah, and I think about, in our school, we use an advisory system, similar to what Chad was talking about at the beginning with family groups, that we called it. So an advisory system where all scholars have an advisor in a group of 10 to 12 same grade, same sex peers. And I think one of the beauties of that system is, if it's a student with a disability, a student with an IEP, what may typically happen is, an issue with the scholar happens, and so I automatically notify the case manager or the special education teacher, and it's kind of like their problem to deal with. But I think with this advisory system, one beautiful byproduct of it is all scholars are our scholars, is what we say at our school. And so if I'm the behavioral interventionist, it's really not on me if a kid has a whopper freak out and we need to put a plan in place. It's more like, well, were you the teacher in the classroom and that happened? Cool, so what are you gonna do about it? And really empowering teachers through that lens of, it isn't so much about saying this person is responsible for all things special education and this person is responsible for all things behavior, but saying we collectively own the growth and development of our scholars. And so anything that happens in a content, in a certain setting, you actually don't get to come to me and say, like, will you fix it? You can come to me and ask, what can I do? Will you help me? But if it happened in your classroom, then I'm gonna walk through you to call home or make a plan or implement a plan. I'm gonna walk with you in that, but you're the one that's gonna own it. And you're gonna develop your skills in that process, and you're gonna better understand how to serve kids. And so when it kind of gets to that, the feasibility, I think it's kind of flipping the narrative too, of these conversations. I taught for 5 years, it is hard to have those individual specific conversations and find time in your schedule to do it, but flipping the conversation of part of my role as an educator, part of what's required to be effective is figuring out systems, my personal systems as a teacher, to keep track of those things so that I'm having these conversations that need to be had, so I'm putting these growth plans in place that need to be put in place. And it's flipping the narrative that it's no longer, oh, that's the social worker's job or that's the special education teacher's job. I want you to be an effective teacher, and so I'm gonna give you the skills to do these things in your classroom. Not just the technical skills like how to implement a behavior intervention plan, but also time management, right? Those are really tangible skills that we can give teachers, we can give educators to help them manage all these moving pieces. The Together Teacher is a great resource, right? We can accomplish more in a day by just being more strategic and understanding how to organize ourselves better.
And this is definitely related. What data should we be looking at to help us figure out what we should be doing to provide better support for students?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, its achievement is going to trump most of my orientation of what it means, whether or not a scholar is being successful. So is that scholar growing academically? That's important data to look at. And then there are behavioral metrics though too. If a scholar is struggling, let's set some important relevant goals that the kid's invested in, and let's collect data on that. I'm thankful that we're moving into a time in education where we can more easily track character strengths and soft skills and get some really meaningful data around that as well. That's not a super complex answer, but I think when it's on the scholar level, is that scholar growing in the meaningful ways, academics and soft skills, character strengths?
Yeah, I think a growth, looking at what's changed, and also making sure that you're not just grouping everyone together. So, and there's a lot of research and reports. You can feel free to email me, and I have a full library of them. But that really sort of look at very specific metrics and indicators for what you should, at least especially with students who are in my client population, about what you want to look at. And so making sure that you're acknowledging that a student who hasn't been to school in 4 years, for example, and who's just coming out of who had been in GED programs, so, and coming back into the high school programs, making sure that you're differentiating between that student who's now coming to school 3 times a week, but had never been to school for 4 years, so that's huge growth, right? From a student who may have a different issue than, you know, this attendance issue, right? So instead of putting them all in the same like spreadsheet and saying, oh, well, their attendance still isn't good, making sure that you're looking at the growth factor. That's definitely the most important.
I want to address the last 2 questions, and also I want to ask for advice from the audience for my work at Education Insight. One is legal, one's data collection. In terms of legal, we know that a lot of times we are not able to provide service because we are not able to collect parent consent forms. And we want to figure out a system that we are able to get every single consent back so we can legally provide services to students. So that's one thing that we are trying to figure out. 2 is how do we collect student academic data and vision data and store these data so that year after year we can go back so we have their prescription information so that will help our work, but at the same time we can track their academic performance and see if there's any correlation between vision and academic performance. We are still trying to figure that out, so if anyone has great ideas and advice, please come find me afterwards and help me out. Thank you.
One other thing that this reminded me of, like, if you can't collect the forms, I think one of the most important pieces is just reshaping like what the limit is. So if you keep mailing home stuff and you're not getting it back, you know, a trip to the house might make sense, or sitting outside the house for a few hours until, you know, someone comes home from work. I mean, just taking, you know, saying like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get what I need. If this student is struggling and needs glasses and can't see at all, like sending home a form a few times is not going to cut it. So just sort of reshaping how we're making it, instead of just like procedural compliance, like substantive effect.
Yeah, and just super practically, our operations team is fantastic about thinking through these sorts of things. And whenever a new scholar is enrolled, it's just part of the enrollment packet. When the parent is there filling out the forms, they fill out the mental health consent, the vision consent, the dental consent. They fill out all of those consent forms so that we have them from the very first day they're enrolled.
So we have a couple of questions that focus in on mental health outcomes in particular. It looks like in 2 different ways. One is how do we work with pre-K through 8 students to create high school students with better mental health outcomes, so on a very individual level. And then thinking about poverty and the trauma that poverty brings more broadly, how do we organize to deliver effective mental health services on a larger scale?
Larger scale being.
I think sort of thinking at a school level or a system level.
Well, good questions. You know, it's a good question when there's a little bit of silence and people have to think. Yeah. So the first one was pre-K to 8. How do we improve mental health services?
Yeah, to get kids with good mental health outcomes by the time they get into high school.
Yeah. So I guess in New Orleans, this dynamic is difficult because there are so many charter schools, so many autonomously operating entities, and there are many great things about that. But a drawback is, you know, the collaboration between middle school to the high school is sometimes really difficult, and unfortunately not with competing interests and competing priorities, not always what's prioritized, the collaboration between. So I think that a solution, a step, something that I would like to move more in the direction of is how do we, you know, align our goals between the 2 settings, so that elementary, middle school teachers have a better context of what is going on and happening in high school settings, and vice versa. So that as a receiving school of receiving middle schoolers, I have a better context of what was that middle schooler's world before coming to us. So I think that's part of it. And I think there seems to be an important piece around mental health providers in a shared context, so in a given city, that there's like a collaborative, collective effort around their practice. So social workers, counselors, therapists coming together to really deeply understand the work of the city itself or the district itself, so that there is that improved alignment. Like, we may be working at 100 different schools or 200 different schools, but we have a shared understanding of the issues that our kids are facing. And I think the third thing I would add to that then is just continuing to put pressure on school leaders and district leaders to be prioritizing this in schools. I think that mentioned earlier this huge piece around finding the right people, meaning it in the context of teachers who are willing to prioritize these sorts of things in their classroom. But I think there's also a piece around finding the right people in the context of leaders who are going to be willing to prioritize and understand the importance of prioritizing this at the school level.
I think that something that's key is really, really good like school record systems in place. Being able to look back through a student's file and having everything be in it is huge. And unfortunately, I think especially in places where the student is transitioning to different schools, like it's a charter system, and there's just lots of disconnected systems in place, that can be tough, but also just the transition between middle school to high school. But I can't even tell you the issues with the records for students who are involved in the juvenile justice system or the foster system. I mean, their records for years. I mean, nobody even knows that some of my clients had IEPs and any kind of special education because their records have been missing for 10 years. So being able to look back through a student's file is key. So that also, to me, means, especially with mental health, making sure that you're not just looking at the past year and that you're not just saying, well, this student's file doesn't have a lot in it, so too bad. You actually have to be proactive and go back and try to piece together the records and try to fill the file, right? So a lot of times I'll hear, well, when we got the file, there was just not much in there. There needs to be it has to be a priority to go back and to request old records and to do everything you possibly can to get those records so that receiving schools have all of the information that they need to best serve the student.
And I've got one last question that seems like a good one to end on. I'll ask every person on the panel, we'll just go down the line. What is a book, article, video, some kind of resource that you would suggest or recommend because it has informed your knowledge of this topic?
Oh, I have one. There's this article. It might not be that interesting because it's sort of to everyone because it's a legal article, but it's a law review article on. And is there an email list? I can set that. But it's why are special education lawyers important, basically, and it talks about the different ways that special education affect the student, but also how poverty and mental health and a lot of external systems are putting these pressures and what families can do or adult students can do to advocate for themselves in the system. And then there's part 3 is a lot of legal jargon, but if you're interested in it, it's also worth reading. So it's a law review article, and I think it's called the Unfulfilled Promise of the IDEA or something, but I can send it out if we have an email resource list. Please read it, it's great.
There's one article that really informed my practice and my thinking about providing vision service, which is an article on Stanford Social Innovation magazine. The title was called Providing Vision Service to the Poor. It was about why there are so many organizations that are trying to solve this issue, but none of these organizations was able to scale. And that really informed my thinking and helped me to think about, how can we solve this issue
simple solution, the most inexpensive, politically neutral solution that we know. But why can we scale that in this country and around the world?
There's a newer text called Kids Beyond Limits, Kids Without Limits, one of the two. Anat Banal is the author, and she's a researcher slash clinician whose work is primarily grounded in working with scholars with physical limitations, physical disabilities, that writes a lot about just these. She has a specific treatment that she's developed that she writes about just these case studies of kids who have achieved something far and wide beyond what anyone expected them to. And I think it's that orientation of none of us have any right setting a ceiling on a kid or saying like, this is probably about the extent to which he will achieve. None of us have the right to do that because anything's possible. And this text just kind of digs into that and speaks to that. And I would also say, there's another text called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, which is a really fascinating text, again with a lot of interesting excerpts of basically the main theme being, you assume this about this person, because this assumption was made, certain things happened, they were treated in a certain way, but actually this person was capable of just wildly different things than the expectations placed over him or her. So I think those two. And then I just also think How Children Succeed by Paul Tough is incredibly informative for our practice and really relevant in just a nitty-gritty way of important skills that serve scholars well, no matter their context, no matter their past experiences.
Thanks. And I'm going to answer this one too as a way to wrap up. I feel like a lot of the answers that people have given over the last hour and a half or so, a lot of the conversation has focused on relationships between people, either how adults in the system have to work together effectively in order to serve students well, how students and adults need to work together and understand each other and listen to each other. And so a book that I read during my first year of teaching was Teacher and Child by Chaim Pinot, which was written in the 70s, a little old school, and it reads like it's written in the 70s too. But if you can get past the sort of the language that's in it, what it's really about is how grown-ups can talk to children in a way that conveys caring, in a way that helps an adult really try to understand what the student is saying and what they're feeling, and how that connects to what they're doing, which is ultimately what we need to make sure is working well. So Teacher and Child, I think it definitely changed the way that I approach not just teaching in my classroom, but I still think about that book in terms of thinking about larger policy, about how a school runs, just about how people work together in general, so I really recommend that. And I'm lucky because I get the last word. So thank you very much for joining us. We hope this was useful and enjoy the rest of the conference.